Welcome to another weekly featured business brought to you by Visibility Impact and your host, James Moffat, where he will gracefully take our featured guest on a personal and business journey and stories that will inspire, educate, and engage you.
Hello and welcome to another Friday Featured Business brought to you by your hosts, myself, James Moffat, and Visibility Impact. Today we have our 127th guest, all the way from the US. I'm going to introduce him in a minute. So, James, now I'm going to, a beautiful name, of course. I mean, we both share the same first name. Now, I'm probably going to struggle with your surname, which I should have asked you before to pronounce. So, maybe I'll let you introduce your name just so I don't screw it up.
Well, it's James Roguski, and thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely a pleasure to have you. And a topic that's very dear to my heart and something that we're going to come on to in a minute. But before we get there, let's just take you down memory lane a little bit and find out a little bit more about you, James. So kind of where are you now? I mean, where are you living? Just so we know geographically. And then also just tell us a little about you in your childhood and your education, kind of what you went through as a adolescent growing up. And then we'll focus on what you're doing now and why you're doing that. And was there any particular turning point in your life that actually triggered what you're doing now?
Well, normally we dive right into all the details, but you have said that you want to know, make it more a little bit personal. So I'm 63 years old. I was born in 1960. And so in Ohio, in a Rust Belt steel mill town. And so I think I have a certain work ethic that people associate with the Midwest. I didn't work in the steel mills, but I was a very good kid. I was actually born with club feet and had surgeries and such when I was a child. And, I've only recently come to realize it, really as a shock to myself in the last couple of years that I'm of Polish and Slovak descent. So as a Slav and as someone with a birth defect, if I was born at the wrong time in the wrong place, I would have been removed from society. Okay, I would have been considered to be a worthless eater. And, that never occurred to me until just recently. It's astonishing. I grew up as a good kid, very well-behaved. I was a valedictorian of my high school class, played sports, all that sort of same thing. Went to an Ivy League institution for college. I went to Brown University. I studied computer science. And I dropped out in my senior year because I realized that I was being lied to. And, it wasn't even really a choice. I had no desire to continue on being indoctrinated. And I ended up being a carpenter for a good 14 years or so. I renovated old Victorian homes in Rhode Island. In 1996, I moved out here to California. And at the time, California was the place to be if you wanted to pursue natural health. It's dramatically changed since then. But in 1996, when I came out here, I went through sort of a personal reset of my life and got a job as originally just an employee, but quickly became a manager and a buyer for a couple of mom and pop herb and nutrition stores. And so for a good 15 years, I did so much, 15 years worth of research, just digging into all things natural. And I came to a point where one too many people that I interacted with said to me, Jim, you should write a book. And it flipped a switch. And in short order, I published probably about 16 years ago, Your Doctor is a Liar. And you can go to yourdoctorIsAliar.com and you can download the ebook for free. It's essentially about cholesterol. And we don't have time to talk about it, so I'll just summarize it. The lie about cholesterol began before I was born. And it has maintained in good order for 60 some years. And if you think you know anything about cholesterol, you have to realize that there are two separate meanings of the same word. When you read a package of food and it says cholesterol, that's really what I think is the true meaning. If you talk to anybody in the medical profession, you're going to get a totally different explanation. And so everyone is confused. And all of the things that have happened over the past couple of years aside, heart disease is really probably still the #1 killer of people, followed probably closely by cancer. I went on to do a big website about cancer, naturalcancercures.org, and I also have a webpage about quote unquote diabetes, which the lies behind that, it's a juggling game. Where are the bigger lies in heart disease, cancer, or diabetes? The system is the problem. In my view, I came to understand that, and I'll put out a rhetorical question. And in a lot of the conversations that I like to have with people, I think you can put out some thought-provoking rhetorical questions that get people, to consider things that maybe they hadn't. In your life, and this is meant to you and to your audience, do you know anyone who profits and makes more money when you are healthy? And you're going to scratch your head and think, well, you profit when you're healthy. Maybe your family benefits when you're healthy. But anyone out there who is in the healing arts, they only make money if you come to them when you're ill. But if you're smart, you go to specific, health practitioners to maintain and optimize your condition, so you don't end up with a dis-ease. Kind of like with your car, you might change the oil, you might make sure everything is lubricated, change the belts or this, that, and the other thing. You do maintenance and optimization for your car. And maybe some people do a little bit of that. They try to exercise or whatever. But even the exercise world does, in many ways, harm as opposed to improving health. Exercise and that industry is all about performance. And high performance cars break down all the time. High performance athletes break down all the time. There's a way to exercise and do things for your health, for longevity and to avoid the common dis-ease of life. The medical profession is designed, their business model is to take people who are essentially healthy, tell them that they should come in for a checkup, but the checkup isn't designed to optimize their health. The checkup is designed to convince the future patient that they need all these tests. And the tests are designed to find something that is out of the norm, even though it might be normal for you, it doesn't fit their criteria. Or they might catch you at a moment where you're stressed out or you were eating wrong or, something is off. And with one test, they convince people that they need a prescription. And the prescription is generally a poison. If it's, has to be counted out by a pharmacist and you have to have a prescription to get it, it means that it's dangerous. They get people to take that poison under the illusion that they're becoming more healthy by swallowing that drug. But, that might harm your liver or your kidneys, so you got to come back for another checkup, another round of tests, another poisonous pharmaceutical. And so over the last 3 years, back in 2020, because your question is, how did I get here? I had many, many websites dedicated to health. And starting in 2020, I had a background to understand and be able to see through the lies and the fraud that has been committed. And so starting in January of 2020, I ended up building, and I had 6 websites dedicated to COVID-related things. And it was just astonishing to me because I know the business model. And when the jabs were made available, to me, I see that as a customer acquisition tool. They inject healthy people with something that leaves them actually less healthy, while getting them to believe that it's for their good and for their health. The impact of it might happen immediately. There are many people who've reported immediate adverse events, but it's a slow building problem. And so 6 months down the road, it's hard to connect that the drug you've been taking, or the drugs you've been taking, or the jabs that you've been injecting cause problems that are then difficult to connect. And so more drugs are it's a business spiral that many people are in, that spiral, and don't even realize that they're going downhill, thinking that they're doing something to improve their health. I learned a long time ago that health is multifaceted. It's not just your, nutrition. It's not drugs. It's not just one thing. There's not a one-word answer. What makes up a person is, emotional and physical and mental and spiritual and chemical and postural and energetic and environmental, and so many different questions come into what helps you to maintain and optimize your health. Knock wood, okay, a little superstition maybe, but I'm 63. I have not been to a medical doctor since I was 19, and you could not pay me to go, because I'm not saying I know everything, but I know people who know so much that when you go to a medical doctor and you spend 5 minutes to have them ask you a couple of questions about your symptoms, and they write you a prescription for a poisonous drug, and you're on your way, and you realize that other practitioners will ask you hundreds of questions and actually treat the cause of the problem. If you went to a mechanic because a light came on your dashboard, think if you have a rash or if you have pain somewhere, think of that as a light on your body's dashboard. Well, you wouldn't expect your mechanic to treat the light literally that's in your dashboard. You wouldn't want them to take out the light or paint over it or put some tape over it or disconnect it, cut the wire, remove the circuit breaker or whatever. You would want them to interpret the light, the warning sign, the symptom, and identify the cause, actually fix the problem, and then the light goes off, the symptoms subside, not because you've hidden the symptoms, but because you've actually fixed the problem. That's not a good business model, because if you teach people how to be healthy, the medical profession doesn't make as much money. And so I've been lucky and blessed, and I think wise in the sense of, hey, it's my responsibility to maintain my health. If I go to somebody who's just going to spend 5 minutes and write a prescription for a poison or tell me to inject some unknown something into my body, I don't think that's going to make me healthier. And so I think I'm healthy partly because I stay away from that. And I'm an advocate of learning and educating people. I don't give anybody advice on what they should do. I try to organize information so that they realize that there are many, many options. And, if you're going to somebody who says that only the option that they profit from is the thing that you can do, you got to wake up and start asking questions.
Yeah. I love what you're saying. And I just want to kind of jump in there and pick out a few things that you said that resonated with me, particularly when I love the analogy, particularly between cars, the automobile industry, and health, because I use that a lot in a lot of things I do, because it seems to resonate and people can picture that. So if I think that, all cars are different, unless you all have the same car, which we don't. So, and they tend to have different problems at different times. So you take them to the various garages and whatever. But I find like with the mainstream kind of the big suppliers, they just follow kind of a rule book. It just plug in a diagnostic machine. It tells you what's the problem, and then you replace that problem. And then off you go with a huge bill, and you drive down the road, but you have no idea what caused it. Is it your driving ability? Is it the way that you drive the car and causing the problem yourself? Not really interested. But you go to the local guy, which funny enough, this is exactly what's happened with me at the moment.
I have a story in my mind. Go ahead. I probably have a similar story.
Yeah. So I looked hard for a local guy that could give me that kind of that personal service, and rather than the big ones that are all the same and they rip you off and they find a problem with the car that they tell you that you have to change it now, when the local guy will say, no, that's good for another 6 months, a year, 2 years, or whatever, and not forcing you down to like part with your money. So I found a local guy, I recommended actually, and go there. And yeah, he tells me the honest story. He tells me what really needs to be done, when it needs to be done, and he tells me how to avoid certain things so they don't happen again. And if you just compare that to the medical profession, or maybe many professions, but I know we're focused on the medical, and I could actually talk about my doctor, but I don't want to go down that path in a way. But it's exactly the same. They kind of get out their medical book of the things that they have to tell you, like these are the symptoms, and then like take 2 of these 3 times a day, and away you go. I'll see you in 6 months. And
I'll summarize it. I'll summarize it this way. Okay. Yeah. In my opinion, the only dis-ease that I could ever have is James-Roguski syndrome. It's a terminal illness. I'm managing it to the best of my ability for 63 years now, doing pretty good. Doesn't cause me very much discomfort. But the system, if a person were to go into, in the United States anyways, they don't have an insurance reimbursement code for James-Roguski syndrome. They have to ask me, or would have to ask anybody, a couple of questions. And they go, oh, if a person went in and said, oh, I have a headache. Well, it could be that you just have a headache, right? Who knows? A lot of many reasons why you could have a headache. Maybe you hit your head on something. Who knows? It used to be take 2 aspirins, call me in the morning, see if it fixes itself, because the body is a self-repairing mechanism. But if they were really clear with what they do, they know that, well, maybe a headache is associated with this or this or this or this or this. Oh, maybe you have a brain tumor. We got to do an MRI. Cha-ching. Okay, there's a lot more money if you're diagnosed with anything other than the fact that it's your life. There's every factor known to mankind that are affecting you. But that takes time to ask all those questions. I have stories we don't have time for about, clients who, customers who were looking for a nutritional result or treatment. And you ask them about their life, and there's issues going on that you go, oh, well, you have to deal with that, and you have to deal with that, and you have to deal with that. Doctors have worked themselves into a situation in our Western medical system where they only get paid if they put you in a cubbyhole, if they get an insurance code. Now, it's different in other nations to a certain degree because we have, primarily private health insurance. But they don't actually treat you as an individual. They don't ask you about what's going on with you. And they certainly don't venture out into anything other than pharmaceutical treatments. Maybe radiation, maybe chemo, maybe surgery. But if they can't burn it, poison it, or cut it, it can't be done. And there are just an infinite list. Whenever someone would say to me, oh, their doctor told them there's nothing they could do, or the person will say something like, oh, I've tried everything. I was like, well, everything is infinite. I mean, there are so many things. And when somebody says there's nothing you can do, if that doesn't trigger suspicion and curiosity and concern, that maybe they just don't know. And so that's what got me here. And then what happened was, back in February of 2022, I got an email one day from my website hosting provider. I had many, many websites, that it was all gone. Just boom, I got censored. Everything, not everything, but a large chunk of everything that I had was just gone. And so I had backups, and I could have rebuilt it and tried to restructure it, but I took it as a sign from above that, okay, those doors, that period of my life exploring all of that, the door closed. Many, many doors went away. And shortly thereafter, I was awakened in the middle of the night at like 4 a.m, sort of compelled to go search on the internet, which was, nothing new for me. I do that all the time. But I found an article that had a line in it that said that they had obtained a document, and the word document was hyperlinked. So I clicked on it, opened up the document, downloaded it, and started reading it. And that's what got me into where I am now, which is in the wing of the rabbit hole of information that is all of the things about the World Health Organization and their ongoing attempts to change international law, both to change existing regulations and to negotiate a new international, they call it a convention or agreement. Most people would say treaty, to essentially take even more control away from the people and centralize all that control with the WHO. And so for the last year, I've written probably 100 articles on the topic, and most people are completely unaware that this is going on.
Exactly. So those articles, are they all on, because you mentioned you had 6 different websites at one time. So
I had many more than that. I just had 6 that were dedicated to what was going on, with the quote unquote pandemic.
But you've now consolidated into one main one or something?
Yeah, I ended up on a platform called Substack. So you can find all of the articles there on James Roguski, JamesRoguski.substack.com. It's a blogging platform that whenever I publish a blog, it goes out as a newsletter to anybody who may have subscribed. And having everything taken away, I looked at what was available out there, and so far, so good, wonderfully. Substack has not censored in any way. People are free to speak their mind, and as it should be. So
let me just take you back, because you mentioned when you went to, further education, and you kind of dropped out because you questioned what you've been taught. You didn't believe, and you felt that it was lies or misrepresented or whatever. So had you always been someone that questioned things? Or was
the story begins actually, the story begins in 5th grade. Okay. I was raised Catholic as a child. Went to a parochial Catholic school, and in 5th grade, Sister Mary Ursula was teaching us about the national parks of the United States. And I lived in Ohio, but we were talking about the national parks in California, and she was talking about Yosemite Park. Now, I'm an avid, cartoon watcher. When I was a child, every Saturday morning we would watch cartoons, and Bugs Bunny had a character, Yosemite Sam. So I raised my hand and I said, is that pronounced Yosemite or Yosemite? Now, arguably, it would make sense to pronounce it Yosemite, like Vegemite, okay? And that, I think, was the first time I realized that my teachers were fallible. That just because my teacher said something didn't mean they were correct, okay? Well, that was my last year in Catholic school. I went to public school after that. And I was not a troublemaker in school. I was a good kid. But, if it's right, it's right. If it's not correct, it's not correct. I don't care who says it, right? I don't care what letters you have after your name, whether you're a doctor or a lawyer, psychiatrist, whatever it might be. If what you say is verifiably true, that's wonderful. If it's wrong, the respect for your authority falls apart. And so what has happened over the last 3 years, but goes back to eternity. Just because somebody is supposedly an expert doesn't mean that everything they say is the whole truth. And so I believe that I actually practice the scientific method. And if somebody points out to me that I'm wrong about something, oh, you're going to be my best friend. I'm not going to get angry. Now, if you attack someone's personality, that's a different thing. But if you bring information that shows that something that I thought I knew was wrong, oh, you are my best buddy. Please bring the truth, whoever you may be. Okay. And so that's the problem that we find ourselves here, whether it's a government official, some some quote unquote scientific journal, the media, whatever it might be. I don't care who said it. It matters whether or not it's correct, true, factual, whatever you want it to be. And what really goes on with the WHO and a lot of these things is it's linguistic manipulation. I'll give you a couple of examples. And this may get you in trouble on YouTube, so my apologies in advance. Okay. When you hear somebody say something like, well, we have this RT-PCR test, okay, and there are a lot of people who are testing positive. They're asymptomatic, but they're called a case, another word, case. And so there's so many cases. We have a pandemic, but we have this wonderful vaccine that's safe and effective. And for the good of everyone, you have to take it. Every single word, test, case, vaccine, pandemic, safe, effective, those words don't mean what you think they mean. And if you are struggling to understand what do they really mean, you've been victimized by that linguistic manipulation. And so they redefine words, they use words improperly. We could probably spend the whole rest of the discussion just talking about the language. But what I've learned is that, and you and I talked a little bit earlier about whether or not people can speak multiple languages and so forth. I've identified that English, and especially bureaucratic English or legalistic or legalese English, is even harder to interpret because they use the same words that you use in the English language, but they have different meanings. If you're in California and somebody says the word cricket, okay, you would normally think an insect that makes a certain noise. Now you're thinking, oh, wait a minute, that's protein that they're putting in chips, okay? But if you're in England, it's like a baseball game, okay? And so when you're listening or reading or paying attention to what government is talking about, they've redefined all of the words in the English language. And you think you understand what they're saying, like sustainability, right? Doesn't mean what it used to mean. It means what they have redefined it to mean. And it is so dangerous because people are talking. One person has a different awareness. If I look out my window and I see the tree that I have in my front yard, it's unlike any tree you have ever seen. I can guarantee it. But when I say tree, you're thinking of a tree that you're familiar with, whichever one it may be. Okay. And so we're not actually communicating. We think we are. And that's what's going on in the media and in government and in law and in health. I have a friend whose old story, her mom was actually one of the original dancers in West Side Story in the Broadway production. And a couple of decades ago, her mom accidentally hit her knee on a coffee table. It swelled up. She ended up going to the doctor, manipulated it, made it worse, did x-rays and all that sort of thing, and told her that she had arthritis. And so my friend called me up and said, this doesn't make any sense. She was fine. How could she develop arthritis? I said, wait a minute. Doctors talk in Latin. I said, is your mom's knee swollen? She said, yeah, that's why we went to the doctor. Well, arth in Latin means joint. Itis means inflamed. And so it's very clear when you go to the doctor and you say, I have a swollen knee, and he says you have a swollen joint in Latin, nothing actually happened there except confusion. Okay? A diagnosis means that two people do not know what's going on. They just change the language. Fibromyalgia, fiber muscle pain. People go in, oh, it aches, it hurts all the time, right? All my soft tissue. Oh, you've got fibromyalgia. I thought I was just sore all the time. It's just head games. It's government. It's the control of your mind. And so many ailments that people, oh, I have this, I have that. No, you don't. You have life, right? And when they name it something other than, James Roguski syndrome, they're confusing the situation. And what we need to pay attention to is the person who is helping us get, either regain our health or maintain and optimize it. What is their incentive? Are they incentivized to treat us for the symptoms forever? Okay. If your roof was leaking and you hired a roofing contractor, and 15 years later, your roof was still leaking and he was coming back every month to do something, your neighbors would know that you were being ripped off. But you do that with a doctor and it's just accepted as normal. Once you've had the experience with practitioners who really know what they're doing, like you said, with your mechanic who gives you the honest thing, it's supposed to be that we teach people how to maintain their health. And so what I'm pushing back against with the WHO is they're trying to centralize control and put it all into one bureaucratic organization in Geneva, where they have protocols that come down from above. It's not exactly related, but they have an approach that they call a One Health approach, where everything is controlled centrally, and individual health practitioners and individual patients have to follow protocol. That's, it can't be, it's just not possible that there's a one-size-fits-all solution.
Just going with what you say there, I mean, you can use the car analogy again and the mechanic. So I could be going for years and years with this trusted mechanic that knows me, knows my family, knows how I drive the car, knows everything about me, my driving skills and how I'm driving the car. And we have a good relationship. He's not going to rip me off. And the car could live a longevity because I know I trust him and he knows that I'm going to keep coming back to him. And we have this, I mean, there's an expression, you can have a one-time client or a lifetime client, right? So I'll have a lifetime client. And I think if he ever leaves or goes somewhere else, I'm going to be struggling hard to find another person like him. Now, imagine that this is kind of the health, and you've maintained your health, you're happy, you've not had, like you said, you've not been to the doctor since you're in your teens, and you've maintained your body and your health and everything. And then all of a sudden, an organization comes along and says, no, now you have to follow what we tell you to do. You think, hang on a minute, don't I have some sort of sovereignty over my own body and the freedom of the choice that I want to make? And I said, no, you have to go kind of now with the main car dealer. And I said, I don't want to go with the main car dealer. I want to go with the local mechanic. I trust him and I've been working with him and we've got this great relationship and everything's fine. No, all these local ones are out of the window now, or they have to come and join our organization and come to work with the big boys.
Well, what we've experienced over the past few years is even if you had a relationship like that with your health practitioner, they were under obligations to only follow protocol. I mean, that's the problem. It's as if your mechanic would say, oh no, I can't do what I think I should do to your car. I'm obligated to do this. Otherwise I'll lose my mechanic's license or what have you. But it's actually getting even worse than that, because in many ways, doctors don't, I think a lot of doctors don't really realize that they are this close to being replaced by artificial intelligence. If all they do is ask you a couple of questions about your symptoms, and then they have a protocol to just write a prescription or run a test or whatever it might be, that's easily replaced by a computer. Okay, and so they've actually shown, that artificial intelligence can actually, in many ways, do a better job of, reading an X-ray of the lungs or something like that. But there's no way to replace that infinite knowledge of humanity and the inspiration that comes. And I'll give you one example. I used to manage a nutrition store, and there was one customer who came in she had every problem you could imagine. Most people would have said she was a hypochondriac, but she was ill. I was out for a walk one day. I happened to see that she was walking up to the second floor apartment where she lived. It was just a random, maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe it was meant to happen. And so the next time she came into the store, I said, hey, I was out for a walk one day. I saw where you lived. And I noticed that there were these high voltage transformers about 20 feet away from your building that were just buzzing, right? And I was like, I got to tell you, there's no way I would live there. And she's like, oh, I have a lease, and so to move where you live is a difficult thing. I said, you can keep buying all the herbs in the world, but if you are living in that environment, that could be aggravating your problems. I think it was like maybe a year later, she comes back into the store, and everybody's like, oh my God, you look great. What did you do? What's been happening? She goes, I moved. Okay. Now, in a 5-minute conversation with your doctor, they're never going to get to the cause.
No.
And that's really what it comes down to. If a light goes off on the dashboard of your car, and the mechanic goes, oh, I bet that under the hood or the brakes or this, something needs to be repaired or replaced or lubed or fixed or something adjusted. They fix the cause of the problem, and the light goes off. So if you have a problem, diabetes, okay? If you have too much sugar in your blood, it's possible that you have too many carbohydrates in your pantry. Just saying. Okay. People who change their diet, change their blood levels. You can take drugs to force your body to do something with all of the sugar that you're eating, or you could adjust your diet.
Yeah.
Well,
there's
no money in that.
Yeah. But this is something very important, because there's a lot more people have been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, more than ever before. Well, lots of more things than ever before. But the thing is, if I was to be diagnosed with that, well, and then said, oh, you have to have insulin jabs and whatever every day for the rest of your life, I would think, hang on a minute, that's not what I want. Yeah. I want the option that maybe initially or something, but I want to know how I can reverse what happened. Surely, if I've created that by my diet, then I can change my diet to go back to how I was before, or something. But as soon as someone said that you're on this now for the rest of your life, then that would be another alarm bell going off, thinking, no, I would actually defy that logic and go against it and try and do my own research then to find a way that I would cure myself if that wasn't already available. Because
and you said the evil word. Okay. You're not allowed to say anything. So the whole point of it is avoid those complications of what the government wants everybody to, behave. It's like, I want to find the cause.
Exactly.
Because if I address the cause, that's what needs to be done. It's not that you cure dis-ease. Okay. You stop causing it.
Yeah.
Okay. And if the focus of your mechanic or your carpenter or whatever is to treat the symptoms, okay? If my roof was leaking and there was a stain on the ceiling, I could keep painting it with some kind of paint and a sealer. And okay, but that's not the problem. The problem is that the roof is leaking. Okay. And so if your doctor is advising you to treat the symptoms, palliative care, fancy Latin word for treating the symptoms, making you feel better, but not fixing the problem. Okay, fine. You know, if you're really, 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 really suffering, you might need something to tone down the suffering, the dis-ease. But if you're not investigating, you know, they do more investigations, you know, at a crime scene to try to determine what caused the death. Why don't they do that same type of investigation to identify what causes the dis-ease or the symptoms of it? And so what I'm pushing back with the WHO is they put forth last May a directive to all of the nations in the world, 194 member nations. They said, if you have any changes that you feel should be made to the international health regulations, that's a thing, IHR, it's improperly named because it's not about health at all. So that's where people really get confused. The international health regulations are really about surveillance and monitoring and reporting and the declaring of emergencies and tracing and tracking and controlling people's movements and things like that. And so they said, if you want to make any changes to those international regulations, please submit them by September 30th of 2022. So all of the nations did that. They kept it secret until mid-December. I finally got access to it in mid-December. There's 197 pages of submitted proposed amendments, 307 specifically different proposals that, you know, most people have no idea what they are. We're not going to go through all 307 of them. One of them literally made my jaw drop. I was reading it for the first time, and I noticed that my jaw was hanging open. And I literally pushed my jaw up, and it fell back down again. I guess I was shocked, right? India proposed changing some of the language in the existing regulations. When I first read the regulations a year and a half ago, I got to Article 3, and there's a line in the existing regulations that says that the regulations have to be implemented with full respect for the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of people. I go, okay, that sounds good, right? India has proposed crossing that out. I mean,
why?
Well, that's what I was thinking to myself. It's astonishing that anybody would actually even put that in writing. You don't have to take my word for it. You can go to stopthewho.com, download the document. It's right there. Okay. And so I looked at that and I was like, well, that's just completely and totally wrong. I'm 100% opposed to that. That's a certain kind of crazy, but it's also actually a blessing. Because if you're aware that something so fundamental would just be crossed out, you go, well, what else are they doing, right? So the other main one, I was just actually speaking to a friend in Malaysia this morning. Malaysia proposed amending a different article so that, and in tandem with the proposal from Bangladesh, there's a definition of terms in the first article of the regulations, and one of the terms is either temporary or standing recommendations. And the current definition, anybody could understand, it's non-binding advice. Well, that's what a recommendation is. I think everybody comprehends that. They want to cross out the phrase non-binding. And they want to make recommendations be mandatory. So, well, wait a minute. If you're just changing the definition of the word, why don't you just say it's an order, right? Just cross out the word recommendation and say, well, the WHO orders everybody to do this, because that's the impact of the changes. And so here in the United States, when we joined the WHO way back in 1948, Congress passed a joint resolution, and President Truman at the time signed it. And it says in there, we're happy to join, but we're not obligated to do anything the WHO says. They're welcome to give advice. They're welcome to help. We'll contribute. We'll try to help improve health, but you can't tell us what to do. They're trying to change the nature of the WHO from an advisory support organization that will maybe, help a country if there's a need, emergency situation, to a command and control, centralized global dictatorship.
Right.
And
let me just pause you there.
That's the summary. Yeah, that's the summary.
Exactly. And the more I looked into it as well, and I thought that was happening. I mean, it's not just you talking about it. There's many specialists and researchers and just common people like myself, like thinking, what is going on here? And the fact that surely if 194 countries, that part of the organization, and surely as it's affecting the people, shouldn't we go to a referendum per country and ask the people what they want? Because it's taking away not just our own individual sovereignty, but the sovereignty of the country.
Some countries, you live in Switzerland, I believe, at the moment.
Yeah.
In the United States, a nationwide referendum is not a thing. That has never happened in the United States. We're not a democracy. We're a representative constitutional republic. Nationwide referendums are not a thing in the United States. Okay. And so what has happened, and to definitely try to keep this condensed and concise for people, these organizations in the past have agreed to what they call either conventions or agreements, whereby they set up a whole new level of bureaucracy, and everybody who's party to that agreement agrees to give authority to that bureaucracy, right? So the World Health Assembly has been given a certain amount of authority, and it breaks the bond between the will of the people and their representatives in Congress or Parliament. Once that agreement is made and the authority is transferred to appointed, unelected, unaccountable, and largely unknown bureaucrats, there is a structural problem. And so last year, they met and they agreed to amend the international health regulations. I'm going to guess you didn't get a memo, okay, for your input, and nobody listening did either. There's an 18-month period, so we're already about 1 year into the 18 months. It'll end at the end of November, where the nations and the leaders of the nations could just write a letter to the WHO and say, no, thank you. We don't want anything to do with those changes. But silence is viewed as consent. There's no need for Parliament or Congress or the Senate or a prime minister or a president to proactively sign anything or vote on it. It doesn't work that way. And this is where everybody gets confused. It's assumed that you're okay with it unless you proactively say no. And what that sets up is a situation where members of our government, our representative government, are all too happy to do nothing. They're all too happy to just ignore it and procrastinate and not stand up and say no. And so time goes by, and if 18 months go by, they go, well, hey, you had a chance to say no, but you didn't say no, so I guess that means yes. And that's where we find ourselves with many of these.
It's just dirty play, because, I mean, if you just think about humanity and being ethical and trying to actually do what your title says, I mean, you're helping people, right? Well, where's the help in any of that? It's kind of dirty play that we'll mention it, but if anyone, hopefully nobody says it, we won't advertise it too much. We will keep it quiet. And if nobody says anything, then they've got it. It's like me trying to sell insurance, right? Right, here's insurance.
Oh, don't read the fine print. Yeah, don't read the fine print.
Right. Now, if you don't appeal that, or or say you don't want that insurance, then it's going to kick in next year and you're going to pay insurance. And then when you come back to me, I'll say, well, you have to pay for the next year because you didn't object. And they say, well, I never saw it. And I say, well, that's not my problem.
Exactly. And so, I mean, in a nutshell, we could probably wrap it up and close it up right now. That's the point. They have crafted a situation, and they're attempting to craft yet another one with the proposed treaty. The regulations are existing. They go back, decades. They have unelected people meet in Geneva. They make decisions. They publish it on their website. They send it off to all their, government delegations. And the media is, not obligated to raise your awareness. That's not what the media's job is. The media's job is to distract you with everything other than the things that really influence your life. So for the last year, I've been reading, I can't count, but probably, hundreds of thousands of words, if not millions of words, to where you read a bunch of things that are in English. You have to translate them to this bureaucratic language. You have to reference it to all the laws that are in existence. And then at some point you go, wait a minute, that's important. Crossing out dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms, changing the word recommendation to be obligation or order, and many, many, many other things. My biggest concern, I happen to have from the 1970s, a vaccine passport that my girlfriend had to use to travel back then. And there's this little form. There you go. They want to take this and greatly expand it and digitize it and make everybody have a personal QR code. Think China social credit system, so that they want to have a vaccine certificate, a prophylaxis or prevention certificate, a testing certificate, a recovery certificate, none of which have been defined, okay? All digital, so that essentially they can track and trace everybody and, in a horrible world, limit your ability to travel around the planet.
But the thing is, I was always told that there's patient-doctor confidentiality. I don't want a third party to know what I'm discussing with a doctor. Now, and I'd only discuss it with a doctor if I actually trusted the doctor in the first place, which I'd grown up as a kid. We had family doctors and they knew the family and we knew their family. And it was different because they could recall things, and it's not like going to the doctor and he can't remember you from Adam, and then he's got to get his notes out and then refer to the notes which was probably wrong in the first place before he can even start. But that's another story. So I don't want anybody to know. I don't want them to know my blood type or my medical history or whatever. And because with anything, it could be used against you. And
that's the whole point. It's here in the United States, there are very clear laws against discriminating against certain people based on age or race or gender or religious affiliation or disability, status or whatever it may be. And there have been some proposed pieces of legislation that would add health status or vaccine status to the list of things that thou shalt not discriminate against. Okay, you're not permitted to discriminate against people if they have some form of a disability. You have to make an accommodation for them. And so if your entire health records could be accessed via a digital database QR code accessible system, you can't do this because of that. And so that is my biggest concern, because I think that that's really what they want. They've got hundreds of pages of proposed amendments, not kidding, literally hundreds of pages. They've got many, many pages of unknown documents regarding the treaty. They've asked all of the nations to submit additional text towards the treaty, and boy, are they keeping that secret. Okay, and so there's a few simple things that I think people should know. I've tried to put them together on stopthewho.com. Very simple to remember that. All of the documentation is there. It's all evidence. It's just the documents that they're publishing that nobody reads. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of a Cliff Notes booklet, if that's familiar to you. It's just a summary booklet. I actually made an 18-page summary Cliff Notes version, probably condensed maybe 500 pages of all of their legalese stuff. You can get that on stopthewho.com, just download it. And there are so many things that they are doing. You could just pick one and look at it and go, well, who asked me? Nobody ever asked for my opinion. They're doing all of this in secret. And next May in 2024, they hope to bring it up for consideration in their next meeting. And if they agree to it in terms of the amendments, they've been given the authority to do so. So I'm an advocate that it, and I'll use this analogy. We've been talking about analogies this whole time. If you knew somebody who was in an abusive relationship and the abusive party was trying to get legal control of the person's life that they were abusing, would you advocate that they argue for better terms and negotiate for better terms and conditions? Or would you say, you got to get out of that relationship? So I'm a proponent of exiting the WHO. They're changing the natural agreement that we've all had for 75 years. It's fine if they want to give advice, but if they want to change their advice to obligations, we don't want you to attempt to control our life. The system is deeply, deeply flawed. We're leaving. And so all that's needed is for the will of the people to say, look, that relationship has gone very, very sour. You can go to exitthewho.com to learn about that. And it's something that at the very least, people need to be discussing. And I think I'll wrap it up with this. All of these negotiations are, I will say, flawed, because we don't know what would prevent any problems in the future, because we haven't gone through a process of evaluating, well, what has just gone on for the last 3.5 years? Mistakes have been made, bad decisions have been made, policies have been handed down from above. I think maybe you mentioned, I use this very often back in Roman times, when there was an emergency, they would name someone, a pillar of the society to be put in charge, somebody who's a go-to person and makes things happen. And the name given to the person who was put in charge of fixing a problem was a dictator. They would bark orders, they would dictate and tell people what to do. Here's what people have forgotten and maybe been propagandized to not understand. It doesn't matter if there's an emergency. The people who are acting as a dictator to control that emergency are still obligated to respect your dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms. They cannot trample your rights just by them saying, oh, but it's an emergency. Unalienable means unalienable. Your unalienable rights, your freedoms of speech and of your body autonomy and your privacy and everything else, emergency be damned. Okay? The argument that, oh, you have to do it for the good of the greater good. Well, if each individual person does the very best that they can for their own health and their individual discussions with their healthcare advisor, that is how you stop the spread of disease.
I mean, this is an old expression: look after yourself before you can look after others, right?
And tell yourself what to do before you think you can tell anybody else what to do.
But I know we're kind of running out of time, need to wrap this up. But if you just look, I mean, I got suspicious right at the beginning, and particularly when they said there was a 99.998% chance that it's not going to affect children. And then But a year later, the mandatin children had to have something, right? Be jabbed, basically. And I think, why? If it was a 50-50 or a 60-40, then maybe I could see, well, it kind of makes sense. But a 99.99, whatever it was, then they don't even know they had it. They don't even know if they did get it or if they got over it. They just don't know. So how is that an emergency use mandated something, jab or whatever it is, for children? So that's when I that really annoyed me, because I thought, well, I've got children, and if something that they rolled out so quick, and typically for something that is called a vaccine, is supposed to go through clinical trials and field trials and for years. And then within no time, 10 months or whatever it was, we moved at the speed of science, whatever rubbish that was. Right? And then all of a sudden, like mask mandates and everything else, like as from Monday next week, you don't have to wear them anymore. So what's happening between now and Monday? Monday, okay, take it off. Everything's fine. I can walk the streets and everything. It was just utter rubbish. And they even went back and admitted that it didn't stop spread. It didn't protect. It didn't stop you getting it or passing it on. It didn't stop anything.
And so all of those things are issues that my feeling with, I've spent a year paying attention to and delving into all of the many details. And I do something that, people think is interesting. I always give my phone number on these interviews. So I'm going to give my phone number now. I live in the United States, so the country code is +1. And my phone number is 310-619-3055. It's all over all my material. Call me if you have any questions about the details. But on one level, the details should be subsidiary or less important than a very simple fact. What have we learned, if anything, from the past 3.5 years? We need to have that investigation, that review, that inquiry, commission, whatever you want to call it, to collectively come together, have that discussion and say, they tried this and it was a failure, or it actually caused harm. They did this and it really didn't have any effect whatsoever. Maybe some doctors, learned how to treat people. We need to evaluate from top to bottom what was done, what, quite frankly, mistakes were made, what crimes were committed, what abuses occurred. Decide what makes sense to learn from that before we ever even remotely think about negotiating and entering into a legally binding agreement to give more authority and billions and billions of dollars to an organization that just got done failing miserably.
Yeah,
that's insanity. And so for all of your viewers, I just encourage people to pay attention. We're in this, it's a marathon. They are meeting this May 21st to the 30th. I don't believe they have plans to adopt these amendments or treaty this year. They have to submit a final version of the amendments by January, and then they're shooting for next May for the treaty. We need to stand up for our freedoms and our dignity and our human rights. And I don't know who said this. I saw it somewhere. I don't know who to attribute it to, but I think it makes sense. We get the exact amount of tyranny that we allow. And until we say stop, we will not allow you to negotiate an agreement to give yourself more authority and money until we have had an honest discussion and a review, a binding, discussion about these mistakes were made and they cannot be made ever again. We thought we did that with the Nuremberg trials, but this one's trickier. Okay, they've done all kinds of things to get around that. I'm an advocate for an open, clear review of what has happened, and that all of these negotiations just absolutely have to stop because they're inappropriate to be moving forward, giving more authority to unelected, unaccountable people. We have work to do right now, and it has to be done before we allow any of that to continue.
Yeah. So on that, I mean, there's so much we could digress and discuss as well on this, particularly about kind of adverse effects, the deaths, many different things. But we're just going to kind of keep it to this at the moment, because we want to stop them moving forward and having the authority to order and mandate people's health. But I mean, there's many others that are working on this as well. I mean, I could name a few names. I mean, like Robert Malone, I mean, Muriel Nass, and a whole bunch of others. So are you working kind of in collaboration with each other?
I actually, after we're done with this, I'm going to be on another panel with Meryl. We spoke this morning. We speak often. Meryl's fantastic. I think she's cloned herself. She gets so much work done. She's fantastic. Okay. There are many people around the world. If people go, I'm going to reveal this on the next interview. So by the time this gets edited and people see it, it'll be available. If you go to worldwide.exitthewho.com, worldwide.exitthewho.com, you'll be able to see, around the world what people are doing. And I strongly encourage anybody, just pick up the phone or use Signal, Telegram, WhatsApp, or such, and give me a phone call, 310-619-3055. Wherever you may live, we'll start something up, or we'll get you connected to what's going there. I plan on living a long time. And as far as I know, this is the only planet I'm going to be able to be on. So I want this world to be a place that I want to live and go forward in freedom and health. And if we don't stop them from trying to take over, we're just going to get more and more tyranny and dictatorship. We have to stand up for our freedoms and our rights. And I'm sure we will. We will.
Absolutely. So I admire what you're doing. And for others that are standing up and speaking out and doing something about it. We've only just touched on kind of the tip of the iceberg, but enough to get people to start to explore and question things, right? Yep. If they didn't know about this, check it out. Check out these websites, and we'll put them in the notes as well afterwards, and do your own research, because if you're happy with what you see, then it's your decision at the end, right? It's not that anyone are forcing people to do it. They have to do it and be willingly to want to take control of their own choice and their freedom, basically, of any medical experiments that are going to be forced upon them, which to me, I believe, is part of a bigger game plan, but that's another story. So on that note, James, you've been a fantastic guest.
Well, thank you for having me. There is so much to talk about. I look forward to people reaching out to me. I have met the greatest people from around the world. I'm very optimistic, because I do know, I certainly know personally that there are thousands of people, but I suspect there are many, many millions of people around the world, all working in the same direction. And I think ultimately the world's going to be a much better place because of this. But nobody said it was going to be easy. And so we have a lot of work to do. But I'm hopeful that the future is going to be better than it ever was.
Yeah, so just a final note, just to leave you on, you put this at the bottom of your bio that you sent me as well. You said, out of the who and into the new.
Yeah, we get to create that. That's our choice. And so I encourage everyone to, push back against what they're trying to do against us. But what are the details of the world in which you want to live? I want to live in a world where I'm free to travel. I want to live in a world where nobody can tell me what to do with my body. I want to live in a world where people learn how to improve, maintain, and optimize their health and are not treating diseases with poison. Okay, what is it you want? Think about it. There's one more website, and we'll close it on this. Back in September, I put a call out for people to record videos of their opinion at the time about the pandemic treaty. And hundreds of people around the world recorded little videos and sent them to me. And I've collected them on another website through the 𝗬𝗢𝗨𝗥.com. And I feel it's actually very important for people to see what other regular people have said. I'm very much optimistic that regular people, not necessarily any class or nation or whatever, they know what's going on, and we have to speak up. Their whole system is silence is consent. So learn, get the information from stopthewho.com, decide what it is your feelings and your beliefs are, and then speak that out into the world. Say what it is you want, and we will all work together to make that happen.
Just a thought on that. If silence is consent, why don't we do the same to them? We bombard them with memorandums and what we want, and if they don't object, then that means they approve. Play them at their own game.
There you go. Absolutely. Put them on notice that, every one of your public servants, if you had a business and you had employees and you did not give them instructions as to the tasks that you wanted them to perform as part of their job, if they were goofing off, well, is it their fault or is it your fault for not telling them what? So when you realize that your representatives, your public servants work for you, you put them on notice. You say, look, this is what I want you to do. You work for me. You represent me. We collectively have failed to tell them what we want them to do. So they're listening to lobbyists and donors and whomever else. So the job is on us, but I'm sure we're up to the task to design the future that we want to have, and then tell our representatives, put them on notice, and then hold them to account if they fail to do the job that we've told them we want them to do. So you're spot on.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we have some lawyers in our camp as well.
Yep. It comes from the people, though. It has to come from the heart. And, we totally outnumber the people who are trying to control us, but we have to express what it is we want very clearly. And I'm certain that people are able to do that.
Just going back to the spirituality, it's our divine right to have the freedom of choice.
And respect everyone else's. So thank you for the opportunity for me to speak out. I encourage everybody else to do the same.
Thank you, James. You've been our 127th wonderful guest.
Thank you very much.
Wow, that was another featured business brought to you by Visibility Impact. If you'd like to be our next featured guest or learn how James Moffat can help you leverage on the art and power of interactive storytelling for your business, reach out and schedule a call now.